Hello, and welcome to School to Homeschool. My name is Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. I have kids ranging in ages adult all the way down to elementary school and everything in between. Are you thinking about pulling your kids from the public school system like I did, but you are scared to death and don't know what to do next? My friends, I felt the exact same way, and you have come to the right place. I want to help your family leave the system so that you can take the hearts and minds of your children back. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. And this weekend, I found out some dads are listening too. So welcome, dads. I usually am saying welcome, mamas, but I got some messages from dads this weekend who don't want to be forgotten as well. My friends, today I am so excited to have our guest on. And when she said yes, I got so excited. So I would not get excited if it were Taylor Swift. But when she said yes, I was like, oh gosh. We have none other than the most marvelous Julie Bogart. And for those of you who are new to the podcast and have not heard me talk about her yet because you're new to it, I'm excited to introduce you to Julie Bogart. Julie is known for her common sense parenting and education advice. She's the author of the beloved book, The Brave Learner, my favorite homeschooling book.
Yay!
Which has brought joy and freedom to countless home educators. And her new book, Raising Critical Thinkers, which is so good, offers parents a lifeline in navigating the complex digital world our kids are confronting. Julie's also the creator of the award-winning innovative online writing program called The Brave Writer, now 24 years old, serving 191 countries. She home educated her 5 children who are now globe-trotting adults. And today, Julie lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, and can be found sipping a cup of tea while planning her next visit to one of her lifelong learning kids. So, Julie, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Janae. I'm thrilled to be here.
So let's get started because for those of you, again, who are new to the podcast, Julie's book, when I first started homeschooling, was the lifesaver for me. It helped me to be able to see that homeschooling didn't have to look like school at home. And it just totally opened my eyes that it could be magical and fun and learning could look different. And one of the things I love most about Julie and her books, I guess I should say, because you've got Raising Critical Thinkers, which is so good, is she's very no nonsense and doesn't shy away from reality and truth and like some of the ugly things that we experience, which is something that particularly resonated with me as being very numb. Anyway, so I won't speak about you in third person anymore. But Julie, can you just tell us about your experience homeschooling when it wasn't a thing and laws were trying to be changed so that people could homeschool?
Yeah, it's so interesting. When we were talking before we started and you called me a pioneer, I thought, does that just mean I'm old? Because what's really funny is when I started homeschooling, I had never heard of it. In 1984, I was about to get engaged, and the good friend of my almost fiance sat me down to check me out to see if I was a good match. And weirdly, he took this weird left turn and he's like, so are you going to homeschool your kids? And at the time I said, home what? Like I had never even heard the word homeschool. I didn't know what it was in 1984. And by the end of his little sort of 15-minute sales pitch, which included sort of a political message as well, but and a religious one, but his foundation that really attracted me at the time was the idea of tailor-made education. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting is I actually had a fantastic public school education. My teachers were all ex-hippies, Peace Corps volunteers. My middle school was in Malibu Canyon. I grew up in Southern California. And my experience of education was very immersive, very project-based, very free, actually. And as the years went by, I watched schools change. Mm-hmm. And so when this guy was describing to me what homeschooling was, I thought, well, that might be my best chance to reproduce what I got in public school for my own children, which is kind of an ironic angle to come at homeschooling. And so, anyway, by then I wasn't even engaged. So I didn't have children or anything. So I didn't think about that for a few years. But as I started to have kids, my husband's sister was home educating her 6 kids. And these families that I knew, we lived abroad at the time, they were homeschooling their children. So I had an opportunity to see homeschool in action, which I think is maybe the easiest way to start. A lot of people that I meet today who came out of the COVID crisis or whatever, they're rejecting school, but they don't have a vision of what they're going to.
Mhm.
I wasn't even rejecting school. I was just attracted by the vision of what homeschooling could be. And I had role models around me. And so when I began, which was 1991, excuse me, um, I knew what I wanted. And that
Wow.
was to continue the connection, the bonding, the reading aloud, the gentle guidance of parenting. I knew I wanted to do that with my kids, and I really wasn't looking to reproduce school at home. So that's how I started.
Wow. 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 How did your kids respond to this as they started getting older? Again, what especially when like now I feel like there's a lot of co-ops and there's all
Right.
sorts of resources for us. Back then there wasn't.
No,
So what would you do? Like how did you navigate through that?
I happened to be at that time a more religious person, and I attended
Mhm.
church, and homeschooling was really sort of like wildfire through churches because that was a very easy place for networking to occur. It was much harder for homeschooling to grow in secular communities before the internet. So that was a place where I met other like minded people. At one point, I got 4 friends to all move to my neighborhood. We lived in these
That's
condos,
awesome.
and I'm like, can't do this alone. Move over here. And then they all did. It was amazing. And what I realized about home education is the library and Family Fun magazine were my 2 best resources because they were all about creative learning. They weren't about sitting down with workbooks. Now, I'm not saying that I didn't have any. I had some phonics workbooks, I had some math workbooks, but by and large, the majority of education in our family was very kinesthetically driven.
Mhm.
I did have other families. At one point, there were 4 other families that I homeschooled with. Not all of these lived in my neighborhood, but what we did is I would go out for brunch every week with the moms. By the way, great idea. Just say it's for school and then go have brunch. It's awesome.
I love that.
Yes. So we'd have brunch and then we would plan like one, what we called homeschool party a month. And so each family was responsible for 2 during the school year. And we'd pick a theme and then you would homeschool your kids all month with that theme in mind. And then it would culminate in this party that would be hosted at one of the family's homes. And
Oh,
those
that's so
parties
fun.
always included the dads. We happened to be heterosexual married. So it was moms doing the homeschooling, dads who came to the parties, but we called them parties. We
Ah, I
didn't
love that.
call them field trips or co-op days or anything. We just called them parties. And so our kids were completely down with going to a party.
Oh,
If
right.
it's a
Yeah.
medieval feast, you're going to dress up in medieval clothes. If we're learning about electricity and we're building circuits, we're excited to build circuits. Like if it's about birds, they weren't thinking to themselves, this is a school trick. It was just life.
Mhm.
In fact, when my oldest was like 5 years old, I took him to the pediatrician and it was a school day. And the pediatrician said, hey, you're lucky you got out of kindergarten today. And my 5-year-old said, what's kindergarten? And I started laughing and I said, oh, he doesn't know what that is. He's homeschooled. And the pediatrician said, what's homeschool? So that's what it was back then. Like people
Wow.
didn't know it. My kids didn't know they were being homeschooled. They just thought they were living. And I think today it's a little different, partly because the general culture now knows what homeschooling is. Movies like Mean Girls, followed
Mm.
by COVID, you have this much larger population, triple the size of when I was first beginning. But also the expectations of performance then in homeschool have incrementally increased. It's really being side by side compared with school in a way that I didn't experience when my kids were young. I didn't think about school, honestly. I wasn't trying to compare to school.
Well, I think that's interesting because I have parents that are like, okay, what grade level do my kids, like what are the teaching standards that my kids need to be
Right.
at? And and at the beginning, I was that mom. I printed out all 400 pages of the standards for my
Oh my
son in
gosh.
third grade when we started, and then over the time just kind of went, oh wait, why does he have to know that at this time? Speak to that a little bit.
I
How
will.
do you feel like having that side by side has been a good thing for homeschooling, or has it had more negative effects?
I mean, I think there have always been people who care about that for sure. I was a little bit more of a free spirit at the beginning. But as they get older, you do start wondering. I remember checking out the E.D. Hirsch books, what every second grader should know, what every third grader should know from the library. And those books are a little whitewashed. I wouldn't recommend them now, but they were all I had at the time. But I was more looking for ideas
Yeah.
than standards. I'm like, oh, yes, the poem of Hiawatha. Maybe we should read that. It's like, oh, early colonial history. I forgot about that. Yeah, maybe we need to cover that. So it was more like just familiarizing myself with what was generally taught in school so my kids wouldn't feel like they were completely out of step with the world they were a part of. But today, what's happened is I think the performance base of education has
Mhm.
really become a fixed idea. And I really think it started with President Bush's No Child Left Behind and the standardized testing.
Yeah.
And I think that was a real mistake, a real backtrack in education. When I think back to the 1970s and all of the experimentation going on, I'm really sad that that's missing in today's schools. And a lot of these teachers who would love to be freer and more creative and actually use the gifts and skills they've trained in, they are so tied to these standardized test preparations that school has become much more standards oriented. And so then homeschoolers who are new or maybe taking their kids out of that system, they're coming with a mindset that that is what education is. When I look at those Common Core today, I almost
Yeah.
feel like you need, a bilingual person to come in and say, well, when it says all of this, what they really mean is a child who likes reading, right? Like they're like, lexical level 6, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, what does that mean? A kid who likes reading books that are chapter books, like you almost have to go in with can you imagine if we did the same thing around eating? We're like, their digestive processes are aided by balancing, the acidic with the blah, blah, blah. And really, it's like eat fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
Part of me feels like we just need to decode, and then we will start to see that actually our natural lives do so much of the work. One of the things you can do at home that schools do not facilitate as well are what I like to call big, juicy conversations. And the vast majority of learning between parent and child is just talking. Talking. We so undervalue it. We think everything has to be on a sheet of paper, but literally driving in the car, you're watching the signs go by. Suddenly there's a billboard with a joke. You actually explain the joke to your kids. That's literary analysis happening in the car from a billboard. And they're much more likely to remember that than some worksheet about humor.
Right. It's true. It's absolutely true. Well, and I think it's interesting when my now 7-year-old started kindergarten, because we had started homeschooling the year before. I was really terrified to teach her to read, and people kept saying, no, she'll be fine, she'll be fine. So we worked on phonics and we worked on things like that, and she couldn't read and couldn't read and couldn't read and couldn't read, and all of a sudden we were doing read alouds every day, and then one day she started reading, like, and I was like, oh wait, that wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, but it was very natural. And that really shocked me and surprised me. And stuff in conversations, like my older kids would bring up stuff and I'm like, they're learning without me having to sit down and be like, it is time for us to have a very educational conversation. Sit down,
That's
you
right.
know. And that's one thing that blew me away. And that's one thing within the Brave Learner that you talk a lot about, just that how life is, as we live life, that learning happens. and follow some of those interests and those passions. And, like it resonated with me.
I like
So
to
thank you.
say that everything can teach anything and anything can teach everything, right? And this is a real core principle of some of the unschoolers like Peter Gray, who you've interviewed, and other great educators who have really eschewed the school system, Grace Llewellyn, Blake Bowles. What they're basically alluding to is that this idea that school is preparation for life, just be in life. Why are we always preparing for something? We're actually living right now. There are meaningful reasons to understand numbers. There are meaningful reasons to learn to read. There are meaningful reasons to write. Why not just cut out the middleman, the school training, and actually do those things? So an example of that would be making a grocery list. You can write a list that your child writes for the groceries and have them be the ones to help you shop and find those groceries and then pay for them. Or you can do it in a workbook where it tells you make a list for groceries and they provide you the lines. There is this almost sense that if it doesn't look like it's part of school, it must not be teaching what school's teaching. But the best schools are trying to approximate real life. Like if you go into some of these Montessori classrooms, etc., you will actually see couches. You'll see places to relax. You'll see little reading nooks. And that's already in your home. You can do that without it being school. And your home is already conducive to those kinds of experiences. My granddaughter is turning 4 in just a couple days. And she was at my house last week. And I have these bird feeders set up. And she got kind of interested because in the winter, I just have a ton of birds in Ohio coming to those feeders. And I have binoculars. So she's standing there on a little step stool so she can see. And I said, do you want to use my binoculars? What 3-year-old doesn't want to use binoculars? So she's got them up to her eyes. I have no idea what she's seeing, but hopefully the birds. And at one point I asked her, what do you see? Well, I see a bird with red. So I immediately pulled out my little field guide and it's sorted by color. So I looked for the red tab and we just started going through bird by bird by bird till we found the bird. And the thrill of seeing the bird in life, seeing the bird in the book, using the binoculars, this is what learning is. This is what it is. It's not a lecture. It's not a test. It's literally meeting the craving with the appropriate information at the time the child wants it most. And that's what they're going to retain.
I love that. My 16-year-old asked for the game Wingspan for Christmas.
Oh my gosh, I love that game.
Yeah, I had never played it, but we've played it multiple times now. But as we're playing it, my 11-year-old is like, oh my gosh, we just saw Canadian geese. We just saw them. Like he got so excited when he got the Canadian geese card. And he's like, I'm taking this. I mean, it won't help me in the game, but I saw one. So, I mean, a whole flock. I saw them. So I'm taking this one. And I was like, oh my gosh, he recognized the Canadian geese. And then he was looking at all the information on the card. And if you haven't played Wingspan, it's super fun. But yeah, and I love that. And when the connections, and they don't, one thing that fascinated me as we started homeschooling is that they didn't stop loving learning. Like magic was still there when with my older kids, by 5th, 6th grade, they're like, I hate school. I don't, and it broke my heart because I was a teacher. I'm like, no, we have to love, and so that's been a shift for me, seeing my kids not stop loving learning, that they still get excited about learning things. So
I think part of what I discovered in the research, most kids start with just a massive imagination. It's what we love about kids under age 5, just their natural, unbridled ability to play act, to turn a spoon into a sword, to be this imaginative little being. But they've shown that kids who go to school by 3rd grade have lost like 30% of that. And by 6th grade, it's nearly all gone. Yeah. They are conditioned to believe that learning is about mastering information rather than doing critical thinking and making the information their own. And imagination is not just about fantasy. It's the capacity to have thoughts, to consider things that don't make sense to you, to inhabit someone else's viewpoint, to be able to correlate one idea with another idea with another idea and make these interconnections. But if your performance is based on mastering data or getting the right answer on a test, you very quickly lose that capacity. I write a little bit more about that in the Raising Critical Thinkers book than even Brave Learner, because multiple choice testing, I think, has been one of the more damaging tools to that ability to synthesize and process and make connections. It's why I love writing, because I think writing gives you more of that opportunity. But when we are in a classroom and there's one test and those multiple choice answers, there's one right answer, and you have 30 students with different backgrounds and different ways of imagining the world, you are actually training them out of that so that they end up with the identical answer to everybody else. And that answer is determined by an authority that is not them. And it ends up leading to a very fixed idea of what it means to be learned, means to learn.
I love that. I've shared this before in my podcast, but my 11-year-old loves he loves Adobe Anime and animation. And one day I said to him, I was like, "What? You just finished this animation. What would you give yourself? Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10?" And he's like, "Well, in execution, a 6, because I'm still learning animation, but in like my effort, definitely a 10, because I've worked on it for many, 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 many hours." And I thought about that. I thought if he were still in school, that authority would have said, I give this an 8 or whatever, and then he would have tucked it away, and he wouldn't have pushed himself any harder the next time. And then my 16-year-old was doing a Facebook thumbnail, and I was like, "Oh, I think you should do this." And he looked at me. He's like, "Thank you for your opinion." And the market, aka YouTube, is going to tell me. Sorry, it was a YouTube thumbnail. He's like, "YouTube will let me know how the thumbnail is." And I thought, I guess that's true. And he's like, "You don't have to give me a grade, Mom.
No.
Like the market will give me the grade." And I'm like, "Okay, I learned." Like, so
yes.
let's talk writing just a little bit, because you've developed the Brave Writer program, which people can go online. You also have darts and arrows where people can do copy work, and you've already provided it, which is so beautiful, and provided all these different books that people can pull from. How did you develop the Brave Writer program, which is it's such a great program?
Thank you for sharing that. I grew up writing. I've been writing my whole life. My mother is a professional author. She's written 72 books. So I grew up around writing. And I did it my whole life. I remember my grandmother gave me a lock and key diary in 4th grade, and I just thought, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And of course, back then I thought diaries were for writing about boys. So the very first entry is like, "I love Scott Halstead," wherever you are, Scott. But I've always valued writing. So when I got to my adulthood and I had a small freelance writing career, I just started teaching my kids using the books and the ways that I understood writing that had helped me as a professional. But all around me were homeschoolers whose kids hated writing. And one friend in particular one day said, "Can you help me? My kids hate writing. I know that you're a professional. I don't know what to do." So I asked her to bring me her notebook that taught writing. And this program was in like a 3-ring binder, wasn't a very pretty binder. I remember that. And I read the opening assignment, which was to write a descriptive paragraph. And there was a nice sample paragraph on the page. So I read it and I looked at my friend and I said, "Did you like this paragraph?" She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you read the sample. Did you think to yourself, this is so good, I wish there were a second paragraph?" She said, "I can't even remember what it said." And I just closed the notebook and I said, "If you want your kids to learn to write, why would you teach them using a paragraph that was so unremarkable you don't even remember it?" She's like, "But isn't it correct?" I said, "Is that the kind of writing we read? Correct writing? Or do we read writing that is compelling?" Peter Elbow, who is really the writing guru of the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s, he always says that writing ought to have power. Accuracy is a much lower bar than power. And so when I started Brave Writer, that was really the sort of aim I had, was to put parents and kids in touch with connecting with a reader. That writing was about readers first. It wasn't about grades, evaluation, proper spelling, or punctuation. It was this journey from the soul onto the page or screen that then resonated with a reader. So Brave Writer was really birthed out of that. I wrote a manual in 1999 that I started selling in 2000. And then I started teaching online classes. Oh, hold on. Okay. And then I started teaching online classes. And I actually started, ironically, Janae, with an email list. There were no online programs or platforms back then for classes. So I just created this email conversation where parents would share with me their kids' writing. I'd give them activities to try. And then I would coach the parent in how to be a good writing coach to their child. And we could read each other's writing. Everybody in the class could read my feedback and read the other kids' writing and my comments on that writing. And I saw such huge progress in these parents and in these kids that I knew I really had something.
Yeah.
That what was missing wasn't so much how to use a comma, how to write a paragraph. It was actually how to facilitate a good parent-child relationship while teaching writing. And that's the thing that's missing. How do we teach writing so our kids don't burst into tears, so that they feel excited about what's on the page, and so that the parent and child actually grow the writer, not just grade the writer?
I love that. I love that. And now it's in 191 countries, which blows me away. Now, the manual that you wrote, was that the Writer's Jungle?
That's correct, which is now retired, but you probably have it.
I do. Like I said, if you sold it, I bought it. I was like, everything she puts out, I will buy. So I do. I have the Writer's Jungle, and then of course I bought in the darts and the arrows, and depending on the child.
Yeah.
And
so the Writer's Jungle today is now called Growing Brave Writers. And after 24 years of experience, or 23 years, I felt like we needed a revision that really was more up to date with all the insights that we've learned, because we've been teaching hundreds of thousands of people. So I rewrote it. It's in a format that parents have told me is much easier to use. We have sort of coaching material and then a very clear activity. And then I include even some examples of like what I call a checklist for your self-esteem. So it helps you actually feel good about what you've accomplished. And then there's a word bank of sort of the Common Core, scope, and sequence kind of language. And then I write a sample narrative paragraph about what a child would get out of those activities using that sort of educational ease we were talking about before, because so many parents now homeschool through charter schools or submit their work to some kind of a state evaluation at the end of the year. And so I wanted to, give them a leg up, make it easier. So Growing Brave Writers is really the spine of the program. But then we have online classes. And then, as you alluded to, we have these products that have ridiculous names: quill, dart, arrow, boomerang, slingshot. These semi-violent weapons to describe writing is insane. But back in the day, I started with the arrow because it was an email communication. And my tagline was, shooting language arts help right into your inbox. So I used an arrow, and then I felt, well, I have to continue with weapons.
My son loved it, so it works. Now, how do you feel like after working with parents, because part of the program is helping parents become confident that may not have been good writers themselves.
Right.
Do you find that parents come out with more confidence in their own writing abilities as well?
Two things happen to parents. Now, there are plenty of parents who feel comfortable with writing. And so this format often feels like, oh, good, I get to teach kids to write the way I actually write. I didn't know I was allowed to do that. So I get that a lot from like professional writers or parents who were natural at writing. But there's another category of parent, and I think it's far more common, and that is the damaged writer. So many adults have been damaged by the educational model of writing instruction. And it's incredible to me that schools continue to teach the way that damages writers and makes adults nervous about writing. The number of adults who've written to me either in email or direct message, and they say, I was nervous to even write you because I was afraid I'd make a mistake. Of course, not knowing that I'd be the last person to care about a spelling error or a punctuation mark. But they don't know that. That's all holdover from school. And so what those parents are like when they're teaching their kids is they're very uptight, and they're actually more exacting than the confident parent, because they don't want their child to suffer the pain they've experienced for being, either downgraded or ridiculed or mocked for mistakes. And so they're like holding on even tighter. I will not let my child make a spelling error because I don't want them to be mocked. And they put the emphasis on the mechanics, and then nobody wants to write. It becomes very murky. What happens in my program is they tend to get healed from that. When I introduce free writing, which is the ability to generate content without worrying about the mechanics of writing, I invite parents to participate and do it with their kids. We don't do writing to anyone. We all take the same writing risks together. We grow as a writing community in our families. This is not about a teacher and a student, particularly a damaged writer who's trying to be a teacher. And what happens is a lot of these parents reclaim their writing voices, and they discover for the first time that writing can actually be not just pleasurable, but a source of real pride. And that's what we want for our children. So I'm trying to heal the damaged writer in everybody. That's kind of my mission.
Which I appreciate. I still, to this day, I had a college professor that wrote on my paper, I wish you'd write as intelligently as you thought. And to this day, I'm like, I am a loser writer.
That is the worst feedback I've ever heard in my life. And I cannot tell you the list of people. I mean, I have so many examples, like countless examples of people who tell me their stories of writing damage. The person who got an A for content and an F for mechanics, and therefore has never wanted to even write on a whiteboard in front of his board of directors. And he runs multi-million-dollar companies. Like, how is that a thing? How can you get into your 50s and 60s and still be embarrassed to put your pen on a whiteboard? But we do not appreciate just how damaging those criticisms are. And what's ironic is we wouldn't do it in any other area. You're not going to say to a child, well, too bad you don't know how to shoot that basket. You'll never be a basketball player. We're like, here, put your feet here. Oh, good shot. Nice try. It was so close that time. We're so nice about so many other things. But for writing, for some reason, we've given ourselves permission to be unconscionably cruel to children. It's wrong.
My now 15-year-old did concurrent enrollment, and she did English composition 1 and 2. And she had, her professor was a sweet lady and very just good. But at the end of the second semester, my daughter started to cry. Ooh. And I said, what's going on? And she's like, I just had this realization. And I said, what's that? And she's like, the teacher tells me exactly what to write, how I need to write, the mechanics of writing, all of the things. And if I do exactly what she says, then I get an A. And I said, that's correct. And she said, but there's no freedom in that. That's jumping through hoops. I'm not actually becoming a good writer. I'm just doing what I'm told. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. It's correct. What you're saying is absolutely correct. And she's like, so I jump through the hoops and I get an A. And I said, yeah. And she said, and then what? And I said, then start writing just because you want to, just because you feel like it. And so she's been reading this book series, and that was the end of last year. And she's been reading this book series, this young adult fantasy fiction. And she got very upset because in the fandom world, somebody was criticizing the character, one of the characters that she loves. And she's like, I'm writing a paper. And I said, you are? What is this paper going to be about? And she's like, I am defending Fitz. He deserves to be defended. And now one of her friends who goes to public school in a different state said, well, I really still don't like him. So I'm going to write a rebuttal to your paper. And here they are writing this just passionate papers.
I love this.
And I'm like, this we write to communicate what we feel and what we think and our ideas and our thoughts. And this is why we're. She's like, well, I like this better than college. I liked my teacher, but I like this better than what I was doing. I'm like, good. Because I want my kids to be able to love to express themselves in written form, So
100%. And honestly, more kids are writing today than in the history of the world. More
wow.
kids. Think about that. The internet became this incredible playground for writing. Like in the 1970s, when I was a student, there was no internet. And so writing teachers who were good were always trying to think of ways to make writing more real. So we created a school newspaper. Our teachers would have us write poetry and they'd ditto off all the poems and staple them together and hand them out to class. They were creating all these what would be considered today pretty artificial ways of publishing. They'd hang your paper on the wall so students in class would see it. They were doing everything they could to make writing not be about a school teacher's grade. Today, kids can bypass all that. They're creating their own TikToks, which is, by the way, a form of writing. They have to conceive of the whole story script in order to produce those little videos. They're writing on Reddit. They're writing on their game chat while they're playing a game online. They're sending messages to each other via WhatsApp. Like they are writing constantly. They're texting, and we discount all of that writing. And then we're like, the only thing that counts is this essay that you're writing for a teacher who told you what to put in it. No. So the homeschool space has such an advantage because we can actually value all that form of writing while we teach them the academic format. So they'll have those available for college. But my best students are wildly active online. And back in the day, that was a bold thing to say. It's not such a bold thing to say in 2023, but like in 05 and 2010, my homeschool mom parents who are generally conservative were like, I don't want my kid online. I'm like, well, if you want him to be a good writer, turn him loose, right? And that's just what you're describing.
I love it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, well, before we get into raising critical thinkers, what would you say for parents who are, okay, they're coming out of the school system. Most of my moms, I say, just do the narration, dictation, copy work for the first few months, like bare minimum, read, write, do math as you de-school, because you're going to need to shift. Next steps for them, right? They've been reading, writing, doing math, just doing the basic Charlotte Mason at the beginning. If they want to move to help their kids become better writers slowly, what's the next step for them?
I do like writing projects that are developmentally scaled. I have a bunch of products for that, so you could look those up. But some examples of what I mean. At the beginning of each of these writing project programs, I try to pick something that's immediately immersive for the child. So if we're thinking about like 8 to 10-year-old writers, the opening project is secret codes. Being able to write where you actually change the alphabet to be numbers, or you use lemon juice and, invisible ink, because we're trying always to entice risk. And one of the ways we do that is through surprise or mystery. It's really difficult when you are being tasked with something where your performance is based on doing it right. So I try to create environments that enable risk or mystery or surprise, because kids are much more willing to dive in headlong. In fact, if you have a really blocked writer, just having them write in invisible ink, you'll be shocked. They'll suddenly have things to put on the page because they'll be so excited to be able to see it turn into real ink later. So this is the way that you start. For slightly older kids, I have an activity that I took actually from Susan Goldsmith. She has a really great book about poetry. And I call it Wild Words. I've kind of adapted it for kids. But basically what she recommended is that you collect words from anywhere, like out of books, from your own mind, off of billboards, listening to TV, and you put these words on little like tickets. I actually had these big rolls of raffle tickets that you would use like from a party or whatever. And we would put one word per ticket. And then I would give my kids tape and tell them, put these words all over the house. And so suddenly you have words up against an item that you don't expect. Like maybe there is a clock and the word on it says fuchsia and it says cockatoo. And so you're like now thinking about the word clock and the word fuchsia and the word cockatoo. And you're kind of for the first time having thoughts about all three of those words you might not have had in the past. Like for me, the word cockatoo and clock share similar sounds. How is a cockatoo like a clock? Could a clock have a fuchsia color? Like you find yourself marinating in the power of language. And sometimes your kids will make this amazing connections, and suddenly you're like in the world of description or the world of function or the world of just literary interest. And so you go around, you put all these word tickets all over the house, you get used to it for a while. And then I have students bring in as many items as possible and make a word sculpture. And so now they're taking all those tickets off, and now they're creating a sculpture with these words, describing all these items they've built together. And then eventually you can turn them into poems, but we're playing with language.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I did this with my kids. I'm like, grab 4 or 5 of your favorite words and stick them in your pocket. And then today at 2:30, the alarm's going to go off, and I want you to take them out and just look at them and then put them back in your pocket. What we're doing is we're trying to seed the imagination. Also remind kids that you do have a lot of words that live inside you, but you can just borrow and steal from the living language world around you. Like there are places to go when you get stuck and you can't think of a word. And so
Yeah.
we're trying to like develop a writing lifestyle, not just the skills of formats.
I love that. How about like high school students that are being pulled out, say freshman, sophomore year, even 8th grade, and they're struggling, and per the school system, they're way behind on their writing skills.
Yeah.
What would you suggest to these moms to help their kids?
So I would absolutely start with my book, Growing Brave Writers, because what we want to start with is a free writing practice. Free writing is the idea that you set an alarm, maybe a timer for like 6-8 minutes, and everybody is going to sit at the table with a scratch sheet of paper and a pen or a pencil, and you're going to write the entire time without self-editing and without monitoring your thoughts. So you can even write things like, this is really stupid. I hate free writing. Why is my mom making me do this? Like all that can be on the page, and you don't have to worry about spelling or punctuation. And I always recommend starting with a regular free writing practice for kids who are behind, because what they don't know how to do is hook up the mind with the hand. They're so busy hunting and pecking in the air for a teacher's thoughts. They're tempted by Chat GPT. They're trying to think, what do others expect of me, rather than tapping into what do I have to say? We always have to start with what do I have to say? And then I have a slew of revision practices and ways to grow the thinking in my products. In fact, raising critical thinkers would be really good for kids who are heading into high school, because part of what's missing in writing by high school is insight generation, idea formation. And that comes from really deep investigative questions, helping kids see multiple perspectives, helping them drill down to more language, more ideas, more insight. Once you have a lot to say, the formats are so easy. I could teach you to write an essay on the back of a napkin. You can find the essay format just by Googling it. It's not a mystery. What's difficult are the thoughts. So our kids have to get comfortable having thoughts, paying attention to their thoughts, investigating them more deeply, interrogating them for other perspectives, so that when they go to write, they're writing from an abundance of thinking, not just this poverty of language.
I love that. So let's dive into raising critical thinkers.
Okay.
Because that was one thing as I started reading the book, and you challenge perspectives, and you talk about challenging even some of our belief systems that we have within us. Like I was like, yes. Oh, and this is hard and painful at the same time to go, oh, I could be wrong.
Yes.
About some things. What inspired you to write Raising Critical Thinkers?
Yeah, I think I've always been interested in perspective taking. Just all the way back, I was raised around a lot of different religious perspectives. My dad was a lawyer, or is a lawyer. And so I've always thought about argument. I was on the debate team. Like those are things that have always been interesting to me. But I would say that it was really the internet that kicked off a whole other level of passion, Back
Yeah.
when the internet threw open its doors, I always say homeschooling mothers were the first ones through. We were so isolated. There were so few of us, and we just wanted two more good ideas from somebody else, right? And so we all hopped on. And back then, I was in a community that was pretty homogeneous. Just to describe us, we were religious, we were white, we were heterosexual and married, we were stay at home mothers who didn't work, and we all had millions of children. And so I assumed that we all had the same way of thinking about politics or about parenting or about education. So we hop on these discussion boards, and there were literal bloodbaths over whether you should use a diaper service or Pampers, whether or not breastfeeding was a requirement, whether a VBAC was, safe. I mean, it was insane the amount of
Yeah.
arguing, and people weren't nice about it. We always
Yeah.
started out nice, and then it would end up pretty hostile. I always joke that my generation invented trolling. But the big question that I think I was asking myself wasn't so much which idea was right. I was really curious about why everyone thought they were right.
Yeah.
Why? Why did we feel so convinced that we had to shout down another well-meaning mother? Like,
Right.
Well, there was precious little curiosity. And I really think it's a holdover from school, this right answer, thinking that there's one answer. If I cite an authority that supports my answer, everyone has to hop on board. And we were all like, wait, you're not hopping on board. What is wrong with you? I think that's a lot what was going on. So I got very interested in, why do we think we're right? What builds our thinking? What are the foundations of thinking well? And I just got on a study for 3 decades.
Wow. Yeah, I loved it. And the sad part is, this is the sad part in my opinion, is I still go, like I go onto Facebook, I go in these groups, and people are dead set on being right. And I thought even some of the groups that I had joined, because we're eclectic unschoolers.
Right.
And so I thought, well, in this unschooling group, we're all going to be thinking the same. And then
they're the worst.
That's what I discovered. And just, I mean, bloodbaths.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And you see these moms and I'm like, wait a minute. We all have things to offer and beliefs, and it enriches our lives by hearing these other perspectives and looking from another person's viewpoint. And Atticus finching our lives going, wait, but what if we looked from their perspective, how it could be enriching to us? But still, it's bloodbath.
No,
you still go on.
I mean, I think for some reason, I always thought that the unschooling community as a group would be the most open-minded to diverse thinking, but I found them to be the most toxic, to be completely frank.
Yeah.
But I think here's the reason, and I talk about this in my book. We trend toward what I call ideological purity when we are in the most marginalized groups, because we feel like our voice can't be heard above the din of, sort of conventional thinking. So
Yes.
I felt the same way when I was having home births. Like the home birthing community is so defensive. It's because they are such a small percentage. And so they don't ever want any bad news to get out. They're like, if there was a bad home birth, we're not allowed to talk about it publicly because we've just got to champion the cause or it'll get extinguished by medical birth. And I think unschooling falls into that category. It is such a departure from traditional education that they feel like if we even let in a tiny fraction of this other thinking, it'll get diluted and no one will know that it exists as an option. What I wish is that we could just all be more frank about that exact experience. We could say, I hear what you're saying. This works for you. The way I see unschooling is this, or the way I see birth is this, but what we end up doing is we bash the thing that feels like a threat. And that's one of the dangers. And we see it politically right now at the highest level. We cannot tolerate the idea that we have to come to some mutual arrangements. I talk about in the book that when we are thinking of problem solving, the conversion model does not work. We know this. You cannot assume that you are right and the only way for your view to make it, into law is to convert all the people who disagree with you. It has never worked. What does work is being interested in as many perspectives around that topic from as many kinds of people as possible, and then asking the question, how do we cultivate a policy that accounts for as many of those as possible? And that is the trick. You can practice in your family and you'll see how challenging it is. You know,
Yeah.
one child wants to watch TV at this time. This one wants to play the computer at this time. They can't do it at the same time because it'll be too loud. Like, how do we account for everybody's needs and come up with a solution where everyone feels like they were a part of that solution, not like one has to
Yes.
cave and the other wins?
Yes. I love that one. I think too is when, like, with marginalized groups like unschoolers,
Yes.
that it's almost like if that piece is wrong, then all of it's wrong, and we tend to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater with things. And I find this with religion. I find this
Right.
with, you know, whatever, that, oh, if this is seen, then we have to throw the whole thing out. And it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. We can accept it and go, yeah, okay, so that piece of unschooling doesn't work so great. We're going to have to, like with so that's why I'm eclectic, is because I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have to utilize a math program because I'm not great with math and my son wants to learn geometry.
Well,
or algebra too, you know, like
100%. And the problem is, and here's what I really dislike. If you only gain membership to a community by adopting their point of view and never saying your truth, you're actually being trained to lie about your experience just so you can keep your relationships. And this is actually the foundation of all cults. And I've been in one, so I'm speaking from authority. So what happens, yeah, I mean, just to say that, I'm not here to bash anybody. Truth seekers end up in communities where they deep six their true experience in order to live up to the party line, because they don't want to lose their relationships and they don't want to lose the sparkling vision that first attracted them to that group to begin with. So you get invited into this like homeschool experience, right? And it looks like it's this magical, everybody's learning, we all get along. They can be driven by their passions and interests. And then you hit a limit and you start thinking, well, what am I allowed to do about this limit? Well, in some communities, nothing. You just keep being told, wait, when they're interested, it'll happen. And you don't realize that maybe somebody who's saying that is actually naturally inclined to writing or naturally inclined to math. And so they're creating opportunities they don't even see they're creating. And then this person over here who doesn't have that knack is never creating those opportunities and isn't able to sort of engender and lead in that area. And so how could one size fit all of us? And if we believe in learning, and I truly do, I do think you can learn in any context. Like, I'm not a public school basher at all. I loved public school. I have kids who went to public high school. It's just know what you're in. Know what you're in. Know its limits, know its strengths, take advantage of its strengths, shore up the limits. And that's true in every educational context.
I love that. And I loved recently you posted to, well, a couple of things in the Brave Learner. I loved it because I was embracing the unschooling movement, but at the same time, I'm like, and I like some classes. And you brought, right as I'm thinking all of this, I was listening to the book again because I had, you know, I listened to it when I very first started homeschooling, and we were school at homers, and then moving to the unschooling movement. And you're like, I was reading all about unschooling, and then I was taking a college course, and I loved it. And I'm like, yes, I can hear it. And then just recently you posted on, I can't remember if it was Instagram or Facebook, and you're like, if things don't work, then you shift and you adjust and it's okay. And I'm like, yes, you know, and I love that, you know, it resonated and it spoke to me. And again, raising critical thinkers challenged my brain. And I was like, okay, it's true. Julie is telling the truth. You know, like, I need to challenge some things that I do and think. And I want my kids to think that way too. Like, I want them to be able to challenge things and challenge the status quo and be able to articulate what they think and not be afraid to say, hey, and by the way, these are some ugly things about my perspective as well. You know, I love that stuff.
Giving your kids the ability to disagree with you is probably one of the greatest gifts any parent can give their kids. I remember when my middle child was 16 and there was a ballot issue in Ohio. And it was, I'm not going to say the issue so people keep listening to me, because once you say an issue, then they all take sides in their brain, they're gone. But anyway, it was about an issue and he wasn't old enough to vote, but he had a really strong feeling that it should be a yes vote. And so he came to me and he's like, hey, Mom, I want to tell you about this issue. I've done a ton of research and here's why I think you should vote yes. Almost like a PowerPoint presentation. It was so well researched, so well thought out. And I was like, wow, you did a lot of work. That's really good. I see all the points you're making. And then he said, so are you going to vote yes? I said, no, I'm voting no. And tears sprung from his eyes. And he says, Mom, I count on you to be logical. And I said back to him, I said, you did an impressive job of stating your case, but you also didn't account for any of my worries. And I have a difference of opinion, which I feel comfortable with. If you want to know about it, I'll share it. And your way is probably going to win in the end, which this year it did on the ballot. So that was kind of interesting too. We laughed about it over Christmas. But I said, you can have a really strong stand and not everyone's going to agree with it, even when you've done persuasive commenting, because they have a whole set of invisible to you criteria. And until you know what that criteria is, what you were doing to persuade me wasn't persuading me, you know? And so it was really a great moment for us to realize we could have different opinions. My daughter became a vegan and did the same thing. Showed me all the PETA videos, you know, people for the ethical treatment of animals, and explained the health benefits and all this stuff. And I said, great, let's shop. We'll get you the foods you need. And she said, so are you going to be vegan with me? And I said, no. And again, just shock and horror. Today, she's not even a vegan, you know, 15 years later. And so I think it's really important to give full benefit. Like, I didn't feel the need to talk either kid out of their position. My position isn't the right position. It just happens to be mine. And I can listen, validate, support, buy the right foods, have the conversations, and still disagree. And now my kids all know that that's the way it is. They're all adults. And they talk with each other that way. You know, there's a lot of open room for people to have differences of opinion and still be connected and close.
I love that. Okay, last thing I want to talk about, which might seem like totally moving, but I want to talk because I haven't talked about it yet on my podcast, and that's poetry tea time.
Ooh, I love it.
And so would you mind sharing poetry tea time? I know how our family does it. Like, we kind of morphed it a little bit.
Good.
But talk about how you started poetry tea, what it is, and kind of how you started that, what that looks like.
Yeah. So back in the early internet days, I was on this email list for Charlotte Mason followers. And this one mom talked about how she was teaching her kids all these geographic terms, you know, latitude, longitude, whatever. And they were bored. So the mom started making tea, and she called it geography tea, or I think it was just tea with geography, something like that. Well, I was a daily tea drinker. Back when I was pregnant with my first child, my midwife was British, and she used to make me tea every time I came in for an appointment. And so I became this lifelong committed tea drinker. So when I read that, I thought, that's interesting. What subject am I worried my kids won't like that I could pair with tea? I was like, I see the theory behind this idea. I like it.
I'm getting this. Yeah.
And so one day I farmed out 4 of my kids, and I kept Johanna home. She was my daughter who had shown some interest in Shakespeare. I really love Shakespeare. And so I got out my Leon Garfield Shakespeare storybooks, and we picked Midsummer Night's Dream, and we set the whole table, and we made tea, and I made scones with her, and we had lemon yogurt. And I read her the whole story, and she was like good as gold, like every sip, every, you know, listening, remembering. And I thought, well, now this is interesting. Maybe we should do poetry with tea next week. So then I brought the other kids in. We went to the library. We checked out just a slew of poetry books, anthologies, Jack Prelutsky, Shel Silverstein, like all of them. Stacked them up on the table, made tea. I had my kids go it in the backyard and get things to make a centerpiece. We lit candles, which, by the way, if you like candles, have enough for everybody. They all want to light them. They all want to put them out, and they're all going to run their fingers through the flames. So just see if you can tolerate
Enough.
that.
I love that.
Yes, but that's
love
reality.
Yeah.
And so they're sipping tea, eating snacks, and they're paging through the books. And the only objective is to find a poem to share with everybody. And they would read the poem. We would laugh or maybe comment, but mostly just reading. My kids who couldn't read yet would pick by picture, and then either one of the kids who could read or me, we would read it aloud on their behalf. And this just became like a sacred routine for us. There was a point at which we were doing it daily. Mostly we did it weekly. It was always a cure for a day gone wrong. Like if everything was falling apart, I'd be like, time for a poetry tea time. As my kids got older, just fun kind of thing, they started inviting friends. My kids who went to public school did it with their public school friends. And these friends were like, this is mind blowing. You know, the ones who went to high school. My son, Jacob, was a resident assistant at Ohio State. He did it on his dorm floor with his dorm guys. My two daughters both started literary magazines in college with poetry. And one of my other kids started a poetry slam at St. John's College, and it became the most popular activity of the whole school. So they took it with them right into adulthood. And I just really attribute it to snacks and tea. It can be any liquid, by the way. It can be hot chocolate. It can be orange juice. It's just got to be in a teapot. It just has to be poured from a teapot.
Well, that's what when I read that, I was like, we're doing this. We're doing. So I made the table so fancy, and I got out the teapot. My kids think tea is disgusting, so we made hot chocolate.
Perfect.
They're like, why would we drink brown water? Why would we do that? And we made cute snack and the whole thing. And I put out all the poetry books.
I love it.
And I was really expecting, because again, I was trying all these different things, and I had so many failures, right? But my kids were like, even my boys took it so seriously. And here, one of them was 14, he was 14, and he's like, and they sat there just scouring. And I was like, wait, what? And they're just looking just for the perfect poem to share. So we did it, and they're like, that was amazing. So then my parents came into town, and my kids were like, we have to do poetry tea time with Nan and Papa. Oh. And my father, who was a farmer, like a farm boy, he worked corporate America growing up. As an adult and when I was growing up, but never, not much of a reader, didn't like poetry. And of all the people at our poetry tea time with my parents, it was my dad who was the most careful. And he's like, I found a beautiful poem. May I stand up and read it?
Oh my gosh.
And my kids were like, sure, if you want to. And he's like, are there rules? And we're like, no, there's no, we're just enjoying it. Anyway. And he was emotional as he read, Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Oh my gosh.
And and he's like, and my kids were like, this is beautiful. And then my parents called all my siblings. Everyone needs to do poetry tea time. And they're like, are you doing this weekly? I'm like, no, we just do it every few weeks, sometimes every few months. It's just fun.
Right.
And my mom was like, and still to this day, now they're very aged, and their health is declining very quickly. But my mom still said, I loved when we came to visit and we did the poetry tea time. That was my favorite thing. Oh. And it's still my favorite memory with your kids is sitting there,
oh my gosh,
reading poetry and eating little snacks. And she's like, it meant something to me. And so now it's still my kids' favorite, which brings up, they've got tons of public school friends that school's down the street.
Yes.
Be a great thing to do during the day, during lunch.
No, or even after school or on the weekends, because what I've noticed, a lot of people have misconceptions around homeschooling, and poetry tea time is the quickest way to show them the difference. When my son Jacob was doing, applying for all these scholarships and applying for grad school, he went to law school at Columbia Law. All of the interviews would ask about homeschool, and he always started with poetry tea time because it's the quickest flip. Everybody values poetry. Poetry is a prestige subject. So if you can explain how you took this prestige subject and turned it into something a child values, people start to understand that that's what homeschooling is. It's taking the properties of home and marrying them to the action of learning. And whenever we want something to be valued by a child, we have to think through a home experience, not a school experience. So tea time does that really, really well, but so does using a clipboard and sitting in the corner of your sectional to do your writing while you're petting the dog and you're tucked up with a blanket. Like, we just need to keep imagining what makes something desirable, not what should they learn. And once you've done that shift in your brain, everything opens up. So many options that you never considered before open up.
I love that. Okay, one more thing. I'm so excited. Julie has a new product coming out. Do you want to share what that is?
Yeah. So my publisher at Penguin Random House said to me, after Raising Critical Thinkers did so surprisingly well, because it's kind of a tricky topic, that they wanted me to write something for young people, 12 to 18. And so here's what's ironic. We've been talking about workbooks being a problem, and they are calling this a workbook. But basically, it is a self-guided tour through a variety of activities and exercises for a teenager's mind to help them become a more skillful thinker. So the name of it is Becoming a Critical Thinker, published by Tarcher Perigee, and you can learn more about it on my raisingcriticalthinkers.com website.
Awesome.
So that is now available for pre-order, and it will launch in May. And I think it's going to be really fun for teenagers because it's very provocative. It's not fill in the blank. It's a lot of answering questions freely, journaling, kind of thinking in ways that they have not maybe traditionally been invited to think.
I love that. Now, and I will put the link in the show notes for raisingcriticalthinkers.com so that they can pre-order this book.
That'd be fabulous.
So excited because I'm going to go on and pre-order it. Let's be honest. Like I said, if you're selling it, I'm buying it. Last thoughts for all these parents coming out of the school system, scared to death, wanting to puke on a daily basis, and every Monday having anxiety when it comes around going, oh my gosh, I'm failing my kids. What would you say to these moms and dads now that I found out we've got dad listeners?
Yeah.
What would you say?
I would say, first of all, just know that the first year is really hard, like the first year of a job or the first year of college, where you're just getting your feet under you and you are likely to do school at home. It's sort of like wearing floaties in the pool or training wheels on your bike. It just gives you a kind of stability and a belief that you're actually doing something. So that's okay. Don't shame yourself for using workbooks, but maybe just feather in once a week, an afternoon or a full day, where you lean into the properties of home. Maybe there's one day a week where you just read in the morning and watch movies or play board games all afternoon. And you just start to give yourself permission to notice that learning happens even on the days when you aren't following your program. The second tool that I have found really valuable for most parents is what I call planning from behind. A lot of us want to plan going forward, like, okay, here's what we're going to do this week. And then when we don't live up to it, we feel like we're failing. Planning from behind is jotting down at the end of the day what learning did take place, whether or not it was at the kitchen table. Might have been when you were bathing your 5-year-old and you start telling fairy tales to each other. It might be in the car on the way to the dentist, or you're having a political conversation. It might be that your child took the initiative to write an email to grandma and you hadn't even scheduled it. These count. Just because you didn't plan them doesn't mean they don't count, but we forget about them because they weren't planned. So start just jotting on a calendar. Right now at the beginning of the year, there are calendars everywhere. Just start jotting down the little things you see, maybe one per child, that reassure you that learning is happening. And over time, you will start to trust that all of life is a teacher. And then you can sort of evaluate by talking with your children. Is this program working for you? Do I see progress? Is your child becoming dead inside to math? If so, maybe you have to recast math. Maybe you keep the program, but one day a week you play a game that uses those skills to give some vitality to the experience. So let go of the side of the pool slowly. I don't recommend diving off the high dive into the deep end. You will feel like you're drowning, but one day at a time. And then talk to other veteran homeschoolers who can be a source of reassurance. Do not compare notes with your soccer mom friends when you're at the field who are still in school. They're going to pull out the 5th grade week-long writing packet and you're going to think you're failing, and you're not.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much. I want to thank Julie Bogart for coming on today. In the comment section, I'm going to put links to Raising Critical Thinkers, the Brave Learner, the Brave Writer program, so that y'all can delve into that. It's so good. Julie, thank you so much. And mamas, I know you're nervous and scared, and dads, but you got this, and you're doing better than you think you are.
100%.
So,
you can't break it. You can't break it.
It's love that. Thank you so much. And everyone have a great week. We'll talk to you next week. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like to connect with me on Instagram, you can find me at janae.daniels, and you can join our private Facebook group, School to Homeschool. Take care.